This is expected. And it stays dry in the far south and southeast into the evening, whilst the cloudy and damp zone continues across parts of western England and Wales. Further showers and longer spells of rain push into Scotland, a wind strengthening in the northwest of Scotland, and a mild night for all mid to high teens across the board. In some places, temperatures no lower than 19 Celsius. So another cloudy start to the day on Wednesday. Areas of rain crossing South Wales and the southwest, moving into the Midlands, central southern England, avoiding the far southeast. Meanwhile, bright spells and showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then later for northern England and for parts of North Wales. But some brighter skies coming along in the south, and another very warm day, mid to high 20s in the south, high teens, low 20s further north. And it will feel fresher in the north, I think, with showers continuing to arrive into Wednesday evening. Clear spells breaking out across central and southern parts of the UK, and a more comfortable night for sleeping then. So a cooler day expected on Thursday, and into Friday as well. We'll see some sunny spells, but also a few showers in the north. Drier by the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is political commentator Benedict Spence, and here's what we're discussing on today's show. Jaw-dropping profits for oil and gas giant BP, their biggest in 14 years, as our energy bills soar. Are we being taken for a ride? China warns the US it will pay the price because of a visit to Taiwan by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. With rising concerns about China's global influence, should we be worried? Plus, Archie Battersby's family make a last-ditch appeal at the Supreme Court to prevent his life support being switched off. We'll be getting the latest. And MPs are calling for retouched photos to be labelled amid concern social media is driving demand for cosmetic procedures and negative body image amongst youngsters. But can this really be that easily filtered out? I'll be bringing you my unique take on the news as well in the Alex Agenda. So that's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you want to talk about? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2:02. I'm Rosie, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Supreme Court has received an urgent appeal from the family of Archie Battersby following a midday deadline on withdrawing his life support. The 12-year-old's family now wait a decision, and the hospital say they won't withdraw treatment until they have direction from the court. Archie was found unconscious at his home in April and was declared brainstem dead by doctors. Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss has abandoned a new proposed policy to slash public sector pay for workers outside of London. It was during the hustings in Exeter last night where she appeared alongside her opponent Rishi Sunak. She said the plan would save nearly £9 billion, but it prompted a backlash from Labour and senior Conservatives who said the policy would level down the country. Her spokesperson says there's been a willful misrepresentation of her campaign, but that the policy would be dropped. BP have reported a profit of nearly £7 billion in their second quarter. That's the highest in 14 years. It's amid rising oil and gas prices affecting UK households, with inflation currently at its highest in 40 years. Consultancy Cornwall Insight says energy bills could reach more than £3,600 this winter. That's hundreds of pounds more than previously expected for England, Wales and Scotland. British Airways has suspended the sale of short-haul flights from Heathrow for at least a week. The airlines temporarily halted ticket sales for domestic and European services, saying that was in response to Heathrow's request to limit new bookings. Last month, the airport announced a limit of 100,000 passengers a day until mid-September. A US drone strike has killed the leader of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Ayman al-Zawahiri, one of the world's most wanted terrorists, helped plan the 9/11 attacks and was Osama bin Laden's successor. President Joe Biden says that he was killed in a counter-terrorism operation over the weekend in Kabul after evading the US for nearly 21 years.
On Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan that killed the emir of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Now, justice has been delivered, and this terrorist leader is no more.
Former defence advisor to President Bush, Jamil N. Jaffer, told GB News this airstrike is a huge win for the White House and the world.
To be sure, Al-Qaeda will try to regroup and will appoint a new leader, probably Sirajuddin Haqqani, a member of the Afghan government and the former head of the Haqqani network. But Al-Qaeda, for now at least, is been worn down. They will come back, though, and the key is to keep the pressure on them, both in the United States to prevent attacks in the United States, but also against our allies in the UK and Europe.
An arrest warrant's been issued for the older brother of the Manchester Arena bomber after he didn't turn up to give evidence at a public inquiry into the 2017 attack. Ismail Abedi, who fled the UK last summer, failed to attend the hearing at Manchester Magistrates Court today. Last month, he was found guilty in his absence of failing to comply with the notice, which compelled him to cooperate with the inquiry. Almost 700 migrants crossed the Channel yesterday, a daily record for the year so far. Latest figures from the Ministry of Defence showed 696 individuals made the journey in 14 boats. Large groups of migrants, including young children, were seen being brought ashore in Ramsgate before leaving the Kent port on buses. Hundreds of thousands of people with type 1 diabetes in England will soon have access to a life-changing gadget. There'll be no need for a scan or a finger prick test to track their blood sugar levels. NHS England say it's a new glucose monitor that's worn on the arm about the size of a bottle cap that will send information to a mobile app at all times. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
The war in Ukraine is having devastating impacts way beyond the country's borders. Businesses are collapsing and households are being plunged into poverty as energy bills soar. It's nothing short of a disaster for countless people. That is, apart from the big energy companies and their investors. They can pop the corks on record profits today. £7 billion for BP in just 3 months as fossil fuel prices reach record levels. Shell recorded 10 billion for the quarter, and Centrica, who own British Gas, just over 1 billion. If wholesale prices continue to rise, which they will as long as Putin war games over gas, those profits will too. Well, I did a bit of maths earlier. The average energy bill per household is set to spiral to over £3,500 a year, plunging 8 million homes into poverty. That's a total of £24 billion a year. Meanwhile, those three energy giants alone could make a combined annual profit of well over £70 billion. Surely anyone telling you more cannot be done either doesn't own a calculator or a moral compass. Well, joining me now on the show is Greg Marsh, who's the founder of Nouse, which is a cost of living helpline service. Greg, it's fantastic to have you on again. Yet again, we're hearing of these huge profits being recorded by the energy giants. And this is profits, not the gross value, but the net. And that's just in a quarter, in just 3 months. Meanwhile, the estimated energy bills for average people is going to go up to £3,500 a year. And the two are directly connected, aren't they?
They are, although it's also worth pointing out that many of the profits that the large energy companies are announcing, and the ones today you talked about from BP, relate not to the supply of energy to households, which is price capped, and which isn't therefore a very profitable line of business for the big energy companies, but is their production business. And one way to think about this very simply is that we're in a situation of economic war with Russia. They haven't declared war on Britain, and Britain hasn't declared war on Russia. But Putin, as you say, is using energy prices as a way to squeeze the British public and in turn to squeeze the British government to try to discourage us and other European countries from supporting the Ukrainian government. But of course, it's us as individuals who are paying the price for that economic war. There are different kinds of companies that can make good profits during wartime. It might not be fashionable to think like this, but companies that manufacture weapons, they're very profitable in times of war. And companies that manufacture energy can be very profitable in times of economic conflict like this. And that's what we're seeing now. What's uncomfortable about that is, of course, at the same time as we're feeling the squeeze, the company's production businesses are making, as you say, record profits. We can feel uncomfortable about that, and it can feel almost immoral. But I actually think it's almost more helpful to focus on what we can control rather than what we can't. There's very little that we can do as households to reduce how much energy we can consume, turn the thermostat down a bit more when winter comes, if you can. But apart from that, unfortunately, it's incumbent on all of us to make a plan to start saving. Saving is the new spending, and now's the time to rein in your spending so that you can start to save as much as possible ahead of a very difficult winter ahead.
I mean, there'll be a lot of people watching this saying, I can't make ends meet at the end of the month right now, already with food prices going up. And the cost of everything goes up when energy prices go up, because pretty much everything uses energy to be manufactured, stored and delivered. So when people, and, you know, I don't have any particular figure on how many people are feeling like that, but it's a vast number of people already, and it's the summer months, reaching into overdraft, falling further and further into debt. What can they do?
The latest estimates, to put those sentiments into statistics, the latest statistics is that something like a half of UK households come January next year will experience energy poverty. Why so bad in January? Because January is a cold month, so heating bills rocket after Christmas. So just after you finish paying for Christmas, January is going to hit. The average UK household will be spending a quarter of a take-home salary just heating and lighting their home in that month. I think exactly as you say, Alex, this is not a situation that most households can afford. Those who are hardest up are already struggling. Those on average incomes or middle incomes are going to face a brutal reckoning over the next 6 to 12 months. We've already seen the government do some things for the poorest households and a little bit for the rest of us. I think it's likely that the government's going to have to do quite a lot more. But it's also really important that we all take every step that we can. Now, that may not be enough. We may still have some really tough situations with households going into debt, with households unable to pay their bills when they become due, and with people in a very anxious state and rising levels of mental illness, of stress. And that's even before mortgage interest rates kick in. I wish I had good news for you. The only thing I can say again is make a plan. It's very hard to save money in January for January. But if you start today and start making those cuts, start thinking about having the cheapest summer holiday you can, make sure you're not buying things you don't need to buy, now's the time to make those economizings. And use the tools that are out there. Use the free tools on the internet. You can use our service, Now.co. There are other free tools out there. Figure out what you're spending money on as a household, make a list of all the things, and figure out where you can cut, when you can cut, and make those cuts today. Now's the time to budget, because if you leave it until the Christmas time, you'll regret it.
Howard, thanks so much. Some pretty candid advice there, and I hope that people out there are listening to you and indeed going to prepare themselves for what's going to be a pretty tough winter. That's Howard Cox, who's the founder of... That's not Howard Cox at all. Sorry, Howard. Greg Marsh, founder of Nous. Now we're going to be talking to Howard Cox, who's the founder of Fair Fuel UK. Do you know what? I've been presenting since early this morning, and my name's all getting jumbled up, so apologies there to Greg. And this is actually Howard. Howard, Greg, they're saying people need to economise now to prepare for what is going to be an extremely tough winter ahead. But do you think there are more that the energy giants and indeed government should be doing to help people out?
Afternoon, Alex, and it's great to be on your show. Honestly, the government can do so much more. What we're seeing at the moment, it's it's sickening what's happening, these profits, obscene profits, and they knew these were coming. What we could have done in the last 2 months, for example, pump prices have rocketed by about 10p, and yet wholesale prices have come down by about 20 pence. That's a 30p difference. Plus, also, Germany, France, Spain and Ireland have cut double-digit cut fuel duty. Germany at 25p. So the government could help with the cost of living, etc., etc. And one of the most important things they could do is introduce a body called Pump Watch, Alex, which fundamentally is an Ofgem, Ofcom, Ofwat for people buying at the pumps. There are 37 million drivers in this country, and they don't have any consumer price protection whatsoever. We want everyone to make a decent profit, but profit is good, but profiteering is obscene.
Unite, the union, has come out today and accused companies like BP from profiteering off the back of ordinary people and companies. Would you agree with their position?
Well, I do. I'm afraid I do. I'm a sort of a middle of the road political sort of in my stance. But fundamentally, what we're seeing at the moment, there are hard pressed motorists, hard pressed businesses. You, in your little monologue you made, you said the same thing. Are being exploited. People are being absolutely ripped off at the pumps, and they've been being ripped off for probably about 3 to 4 to 5 months, and no one's done anything about it. And the government can do something about it. They could cut that fuel duty, they can introduce Pump Watch, and that would probably give a saving to the average family if they actually introduce those particular tactics of something like 15 to 20 pounds per filling up. And you imagine what that 20 pounds will do. It'll go back into the economy, they'd spend it. The whole behavioural pattern of driving has changed. People aren't visiting families, not going to the cinema, they're not going to the theatre, they're not going to the high street regularly like they used to. So the high street's suffering. The government consulted, but they're stuck in economic torpor because there's a leadership contest.
Howard, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure a lot of people watching and listening right now would agree with your sentiments exactly. Now, with millions struggling with the cost of living crisis, how is this playing out in the Tory leadership race? Lots of promises have been made. Will they be kept? Well, let's talk now to polling expert Sir John Curtis. John, my feeling is that, we've been talking about the cost of living crisis for a couple of months now. Things are going to get a heck of a lot worse, and whoever does get the keys to number 10 in September is going to have a huge amount to deal with. Do you think anybody passes muster, and are they going to survive public opinion?
Well, it's certainly a situation where one does wonder why either of the two candidates really want the job at this point in time. it's certainly going to be a very difficult hand to deal with. The cost of living crisis has, in one way, been central to the Tory leadership debate, because I think one of the reasons why we've had the impetus and the focus on tax cuts, and Liz Truss arguing in particular that tax cuts are needed now, really before the winter. Yes, that's in part a concern about the level of taxation, but it's also part of her answer to the cost of living crisis. That is, we reduce taxation and therefore hopefully make things easier for people. And Rishi Sunak obviously has in part responded in kind, not least by saying that maybe we drop some of the VAT on fuel and energy prices. But there is, of course, another aspect to what we might have to do with the cost of living crisis, which has not really entered into this debate. Because, scrapping the national insurance rise is fine for people who pay a lot of national insurance. Reducing income tax is fine for people who pay income tax. But those, of course, on the lowest incomes are often those who are not in that situation. They are people who may indeed be very dependent on welfare benefits for a whole variety of reasons. We have not heard anything at all in this leadership crisis from either candidate about what might be done for that section of our society. Now, of course, Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, in the action that the government has already taken, has indeed given more money to those who are on benefits and also to pensioners than to everybody else. But we've not heard any more plans about this during this leadership crisis. But I think the truth is that despite the focus on tax cuts for much of the debate, I think whoever gets into the job in 10 Downing Street is going to find themselves pressed pretty rapidly with addressing the question of what do we do for those who are least well off. And that, of course, gets us back to the question of where will the money come from, etc., etc.
Yeah, very sanguine points there, John. Thank you for coming on the show. Sir John Curtis, who's Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Well, with me in the studio today is political commentator Benedict Spence. Benedict, it seems to me that, the longer this leadership contest goes on, the more promises are made. I mean, there are pledges left, right and centre on everything, from extending the Rwanda migrant plan to reforming the NHS, reforming schools, cutting taxes, yada, yada, yada. I mean, the more pledges that are made, the less plausible it is that these promises can be kept. How long do you think voters' memories are?
I mean, that might actually be part of the reason why Liz Truss, having opened up such a wide lead over Rishi Sunak, is now beginning to see that shrink, at least according to some polling companies. I think it's what John Curtis says is very important, though, actually, which is that as much as a lot of people in the Tory party, a lot of people on the sort of the free market side are very keen on tax cuts to stimulate the economy, he's right in that there is, a real burden now placed on the state in terms of actually intervening in people's lives because they don't earn enough. It's not, when we talk about benefits, we're not really just talking about the unemployed. We're talking about people who need to survive with in-work benefits as well. It's that situation that we have people who are employed and still can't make ends meet. When it comes to, how long it is that the public can remember, or Tory party members rather, can remember the pledges, this is the thing, isn't it? You're going to get whoever it is in a month's time. Remember, we're still a month away from sorting this leadership business out. We will see prices again going up, and that'll be the key thing, won't it? It'll be sort of how many of your pledges can you stick to, and how many of them do you need to jettison? And that'll be really difficult when it comes to trust, because then we're only 2 years away from a general election, and then you've got the questions again. Can you trust these people? They say one thing, but they do another. And I dare say, as your previous guest was saying, we're going to be looking at a crisis well into next year. And I think people will remember that, and they'll be looking at the broader scale of the crisis and thinking, actually, things aren't changing fast enough.
Yeah, thank you, Benedict. For anyone who thought either the people who will occupy number 10 come autumn are going to be a silver bullet, well, I'd assume you have another think coming. I want to know your views. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, the leader of Al-Qaeda is killed in a US drone strike. He was one of the masterminds behind the 9/11 attacks. But how much of a threat do they still pose? Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McKibben from the Met Office. A breezy but rather humid day with that breeze coming from the southwest and bringing a lot of cloud with it. The heavier rain that we saw earlier is easing away. It's pushing into the North Sea, and we're left with Couple of weather fronts crossing the country, bringing large areas of clouds, some showery bursts of rain, but also relatively warm and humid air. So a lot of cloud covering the UK on Tuesday afternoon. Spells of mainly light rain across parts of Wales, northwest England, and perhaps the southwest in places as well. The rain turning more showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Brighter skies here and feeling warm, 24 Celsius there in Peterhead, but particularly hot in the southeast, where it will stay dry with some sunshine, and 30 Celsius is expected. It stays dry in the far south and southeast into the evening, whilst the cloudy and damp zone continues across parts of western England and Wales. Further showers and longer spells of rain push into Scotland, a wind strengthening in the northwest of Scotland, and a mild night for all mid to high teens across the board. In some places, temperatures no lower than 19 Celsius. So another cloudy start to the day on Wednesday. Areas of rain crossing South Wales and the southwest, moving into the Midlands, central southern England, avoiding the far southeast. Meanwhile, bright spells and showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then later for northern England and for parts of North Wales. But some brighter skies coming along in the south, and another very warm day, mid to high 20s in the south, high teens, low 20s further north. And it will feel fresher in the north, I think, with showers continuing to arrive into Wednesday evening. Clear spells breaking out across central and southern parts of the UK, and a more comfortable night for sleeping then. So a cooler day expected on Thursday, and into Friday as well. We'll see some sunny spells, but also a few showers in the north. Drier by the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're with We Need to Talk About on GB News. The leader of terrorist group Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, has been killed in a drone strike carried out by the CIA in Afghanistan, the US government has confirmed. Al-Zawahiri was one of the world's most wanted terrorists. He helped plan the 9/11 attacks and was Osama bin Laden's successor. Well, joining me on the show now is Dr. Alan Mendoza, who's the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society think tank. Alan, great to have you back on the programme. Cautious celebration that this key figure in Al-Qaeda has been taken out, or is this really a seminal moment in the war on terror?
Well, it's definitely a moment for a celebration in the sense that here's a man who, in a sense, co-authored the mass murder of 9/11 with Osama bin Laden. And justice has been a long time delayed for him, 21 years, in fact, delayed for him. But what it shows terrorists around the world is that you may think you'll get away with this, and you might even get away with it for a while, but ultimately we will come for you and we will get you. And that is indeed what's happened here. And the message here is clear. You can run, you can even hide, but we will get you eventually.
There's an interesting dynamic playing out that I haven't quite wrapped my head around here, having spoken to a number of people about this today, and that is the relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Of course, al-Zawahiri taken out in Afghanistan. One assumes the Taliban weren't particularly informants or helping the CIA in that mission. Were they actually instead potentially willfully housing members of Al-Qaeda?
Well, there's less of a mystery than this than people might assume, because for the entirety of their time together, the Al-Qaeda have sworn an oath of allegiance to the Taliban, as was well known in the 1990s. Bin Laden and al-Zawahiri swore an oath to Mullah Omar they would serve him. That has continued ever since. There was a reaffirmation a few years ago. The Taliban were a little sort of publicly embarrassed about it, but they didn't, renege on it or reject it in any way. And so I think the second of your theories are correct. It is quite clear that someone of this person's notoriety, who would be, kind of well known on the streets, for him to be essentially living his life perfectly normally in Kabul under the watch of the Taliban must indicate that they, at the very least, had knowledge of where he was.
Essentially, I mean, I've heard that Al-Qaeda have been quite critical of the Taliban not being extremist enough, perhaps, for their particular tastes. Does this risk dragging the Taliban into a direction that makes them perhaps even more dangerous than we have come to think about Taliban 2.0?
Well, the Taliban 2.0 is no different to Taliban 1.0. The same sort of hideous principles lie their rule. They've not changed their beliefs at all, any way, shape, or form, and they've not, ever sort of turned in. The many terrorists we know are still actively living on their soil. So the idea there's a new Taliban is for the birds. I think obviously they benefited from a period of quiet, obviously, where the relationships with terrorists were not particularly well scrutinised, and certainly there has been a sort of dispute, if you like, between the ISIS offshoot in the area and the Taliban. But it doesn't mean the Taliban are softies. We know full well what they're capable of. They've reinstalled a lot of the previous dictums from when they were in power in the 1990s, and life in Afghanistan is pretty grim, particularly, of course, if you're a woman.
I mean, the UK and the US spent $1 trillion in 30 years fighting the Taliban, ostensibly to protect us back here in America and the UK. Do they remain a direct threat to the West, or have times changed?
Well, the Taliban, if you remember, were always the harbourers of terrorists, as opposed to the people who were attacking the West directly. I mean, their own particular focus was on, capturing Afghanistan. But they were perfectly prepared to live and work with terrorist groups whose aim was to attack the West. And of course, the reason for this is that religiously they're on the same spectrum. This isn't that they are wildly opposed with changed religious doctrines. There was just a different focus in terms of what the Taliban wanted versus what groups like Al-Qaeda wanted. The reality is that as long as the Taliban are in control of Afghanistan, the space in Afghanistan is perfectly capable of being colonized by terrorist groups who, of course, wish the West ill. And this is, of course, why some of us thought it was absolute madness when the US and others, of course, withdrew from Afghanistan so quickly last summer. A different approach could easily have worked and would have prevented these terrorists from being able to live in peace on Afghan soil.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, fantastic to have you back on the programme today, explaining us all of that stuff in immense clarity. Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Well, let's go back to Benedict Spence. Benedict, I mean, do we now... Alan Mendoza there talking about Afghanistan under the rule of the Taliban becoming fertile grounds to harbour terrorism once again that could at some point pose a direct threat back on UK soil. Now taking out the leader of Al-Qaeda, not a well-known character over here, but a big figurehead in the Middle East. Do we risk creating a toxic cocktail of fertile grounds for terrorism and reprisals?
Well, we already have created the fertile ground for terrorism. I mean, as Dr. Alan Mendoza pointed out there, the Taliban is an armed theocracy. It's similar to Iran in that sense. It exists to cement its own power and to then attack the ideologies that it disagrees with. Although I would say that this airstrike by the US it has shown one thing, which is that if you create sort of a playground, if you like, where all these types can congregate, it does make it a little bit easier actually to smoke them out and to find them, because they think they are in safe territory. They think they're in a safe area. And it's very different actually committing an airstrike in Afghanistan, say, as opposed to launching a special operation in Pakistan, which has far more serious geopolitical ramifications, diplomatic ramifications. So in a sense, it makes it a little bit easier to track these people, although of course you are creating a melting pot where they can cook up all kinds of awful plots to launch against the West if they choose.
Yeah, frightening stuff. Benedict, thank you. I want to know your views. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Is this a harbinger of worse to come, or is this a sign that the West is still able to stand up for its values when it needs to? You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, the parents of Archie Battersby make a last-ditch legal attempt to keep him on life support. We'll have the latest live. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rosie.
Thanks, Alex. It's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss has abandoned a new proposed policy to slash public sector pay for workers outside of London. Last night at a hustings in Exeter, she said her plan would save nearly £9 billion. But it prompted a backlash from Labour and senior Conservatives who said the policy would level down the country. The Supreme Court has received an urgent appeal from the family of Archie Battersby following a midday deadline on withdrawing his life support. The 12-year-old's family now await a decision, and the hospital say they won't withdraw treatment until they have a direction from the court. Archie was found unconscious at his home in April and was declared brainstem dead by his doctors. BP's reported a profit of nearly £7 billion in the second quarter of this year. That's the highest in 14 years. It's amid rising oil and gas prices affecting UK households, with inflation at its highest in 40 years. Consultancy Cornwall Insight says energy bills could reach more than £3,600 a year this winter. British Airways has suspended the sale of short-haul flights from Heathrow for at least a week. The airline has temporarily halted ticket sales for domestic and European services, saying that was in response to Heathrow's request to limit new bookings. Last month, Heathrow announced a limit of 100,000 passengers a day until mid-September. A US drone strike has killed the leader of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Ayman al-Zawahiri, one of the world's most wanted terrorists, helped plan the 9/11 attacks and was Osama bin Laden's successor. President Joe Biden says he was killed in a counter-terrorism operation over the weekend in Kabul. An arrest warrant has been issued for the older brother of the Manchester Arena bomber after he didn't turn up to give evidence at a public inquiry into the 2017 attack. Ismail Abedi, who fled the UK last summer, failed to attend the hearing at Manchester Magistrates Court today. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory. twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About. This is GB News and I'm Alex Phillips. The parents of Archie Battersby have appealed to the Supreme Court over the decision not to delay the withdrawal of life-preserving treatments for their brain-damaged child. Yesterday, the Court of Appeal refused to postpone the ending of life support for the 12-year-old beyond midday today, despite an urgent request from the United Nations. Well, our London reporter is outside the Supreme Court. Alice, this is yet again all down to the wire.
Yes, absolutely. It was about 12:30 that the parents of Archie Battersby put forward this application to the Supreme Court, basically wanting their son to stay on the life support machine for longer whilst the United Nations considered the case. Now, if anyone was watching this thinking, how on earth did the United Nations get involved? The parents of Archie Battersby last Friday made a very much sort of a last-ditch attempt to get in touch with the United Nations, and in turn their Committee for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, they put a request forward to the British government requesting that they do not turn off Archie Battersby's life support machine until their committee considers it. That then in turn led to the case going to the Court of Appeal yesterday, where Sir Andrew McFarlane, the most senior family court judge in England and Wales, he rejected the application and said that Archie Battersby's life support machine should be switched off at midday today. I should state that has not happened. He is currently on that life support machine that has not been switched off because the Royal London Hospital have said that they will wait for a decision from the Supreme Court before they remove any treatment whatsoever. So at the moment we're in this really, really difficult waiting game for the Supreme Court to make their decision. We understand 3 justices are considering it and there may be a decision today, but this could go on any further. I mean, we've talked about this quite a few times, haven't we, Alex, on your programme, and it's had so many twists and turns along the way. It's been an immensely unpredictable case, and of course ultimately at the heart of it, it's a deeply upsetting case for the family involved. Every twist and turn may be interesting for some in a legal perspective, but of course for the family it's absolute torture as they wait and wait to find out what exactly will happen to their son.
Just waiting for those sirens to finish behind you, Alice. So the family have now gone back to the Supreme Court. If they are not successful there, have they then exhausted all possible legal avenues?
The only other option that they haven't pursued is they could have gone to the European Court of Human Rights. But from my understanding of it, is the information that they were told is that the application would almost have been rejected instantly because the court there doesn't look very favourably on these types of cases. And so, for example, in a very similar way to the European Court of Human Rights with Charlie Gard. And therefore, that's why they sort of didn't go down the Strasbourg route. But at the moment, the order that's been put in place by the Court of Appeal set a sort of deadline, which was midday today. And one can only assume that if the Supreme Court says that they're not going to relook at the case because of this sort of request from the United Nations, then simply a new deadline will be put in place. But there is a possibility the Supreme Court could intervene. Last week they said they weren't going to intervene in the case, but that was before the United Nations got involved. The barristers on behalf of the family said we would be in breach of international law. So that's kind of the argument where the family are coming from now. And the big question is whether the Supreme Court will look at that. I think crucially yesterday the Court of Appeal Judge Sir Andrew McFarlane said whilst we may share treaties with the United Nations when it comes to people with disabilities. Crucially, unincorporated international treaty is not the same as UK law, and I think it is important to stress this has gone to the UK, to the High Court twice, and doctors and judges have looked at this, and 2 High Court judges have come to the conclusion that it is in Archie's best interest for the life support machine to be switched off. So this is almost completely uncharted legal territory, so of course so many different avenues. So we just have to wait and see what will happen from the Supreme Court. It may be today, but this case could carry on even further. It's had so many twists and turns along the ways, which of course has been absolutely devastating for the family.
Alice, thank you so much for that update, and we will continue to bring you updates on this as the case continues to evolve. Alice Porter, our London reporter. Now, the trope of mass-produced toys used to be made in Taiwan. Today, made in China is the most ubiquitous branding on almost every product. In fact, China is now our biggest exporter. Over a quarter of all the stuff we buy, from toys to games, gizmos to gadgets, that come in vast shipping containers on a daily basis. 17.9 billion quid's worth of stuff. 3.5 billion pounds of clothes. Things we increasingly just throw away. Our disposable mentality is literally funding China's longevity. And yet, the West is left scratching its head as to what to do about Beijing. How did this happen? And are we now at serious risk of being squashed by a country who imported our capitalism, but not much else? As US Speaker Nancy Pelosi touches down in Taiwan, angering the Chinese Communist Party, who even threaten a military response, it seems to me not only have we been drugged on consumerism, our foreign policy is just as throwaway. If Chinese rockets do ever rain down on an island that Britain and America both vowed to protect, perhaps they should be marked made by the West. Joining me now on the show is former leader of the Conservative Party, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. Fantastic to have you on, Sir Ian. I mean, how significant is Nancy Pelosi's going to Taiwan?
I think it's very significant. Funnily enough, I set up an organisation called the Interparliamentary Alliance of China about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We have parliamentary co-chairs, left and right, in each of the countries. We have 25 countries now, from Japan all the way through to America, including Australasia and India and Africa. So we have a growing rim of countries who are very concerned about the nature of China and of its administration. After all, they're busy committing genocide of the Uyghur in the western reaches of China. They've taken over the South China Seas. The UN has told them they have no right there, but they're now militarizing it. They've trashed the Sino-British Hong Kong agreement and are arresting journalists and peaceful democracy campaigners there. And of course, they permanently threaten Taiwan, maintaining that they're prepared. The other day, they said, to take it by military force if necessary, but they will take it, they said. And that came after the Afghanistan debacle of the West. You're right also, by the way, that the dependence we have on Russia is bad enough for oil, not so much us, but Europe. But this dependency on China is a whole different order. I wrote about this the other day. You're right about the things that we need most, but let's just be very clear. It goes deeper than that. China is the single largest owner of rare earth mineral mines in the world. It buys them all up everywhere in Africa, quite often using child labor too, by the way. But those are the minerals that no one's ever heard of, apart from the scientists, that go to the making in the chips, the microprocessors of computers, telephones, batteries, cars, almost anything that you need electronic needs these minerals, and they have the world's largest processing. We've been asleep on the job on this one. The West is now dependent on China completely, and someone described them to me the other day, and quite rightly so. These are the oil of the 21st century. Without them, we stop. And that is just how dependent we are on China at the moment. And they want their hands on Taiwan, not just because to repossess it, but Taiwan, outside of the West, is the biggest producer of microprocessor chips in about 40%. And they're the ones with the technology. America has now withdrawn all that technology from China, where they still The Americans have the lead and the UK does, but they're busy trying to buy it in through the back door in the UK. And definitely, if they take over Taiwan, they take over that technology too. So very damaging for us, and it's a real issue. So Nancy Pelosi going there does actually, I think, support the position that we have, which is the West, including Britain, now needs to recognize China as the single biggest threat to the way we live our lives and to our existence than any other country in the world.
I mean, Pelosi's visit is emblematic of the West showing solidarity with Taiwan. But is it not time, actually, for the West to show solidarity between themselves and join up together, and not just join up when it comes to using words and acknowledging the threat of China, a threat that, frankly, the West has helped to feed and create, but also by joining up things like trade policy with foreign policy. The Chinese have had the predatory mercantilism of their Belt and Road strategy for decades, while, as you said, we've essentially been asleep at the wheel. What can we now do to stand up to their might?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to, together in the alliance, basically look to how we can diversify the sort of commitments that we've got to China, to other countries. We need to talk about using India much more for some of this process, to invest more in other countries that at least begin to share many of our values, believe in democracy, the rule of law. These sort of issues are important. So start diversifying to each other, bring some of this stuff back home. I've long since believed that with the modern computer-based manufacturing techniques, much of what I call the value-added manufacture that has been going offshore could easily come back here to the UK and to other developed countries, because so little of it now requires manpower. Much more of it is about technology and about equipment, robotics and things like that. And so those sort of things can be done over here much more. We need to bring back some of that technology and that manufacture. The other big area is our universities, I'm afraid to say, and we've been doing a lot of work on this, are very vulnerable to China and Chinese influence. Not only their dependence now on Chinese students and their money, which means that many of them are very, very careful about even criticizing China, but some colleges receive very significant investments from China as well. And, you know, what really perplexes me sometimes is that we banned Huawei from our 5G networks because we consider that it's too threatening, and that's quite right. Some of us campaigned on that to get it stopped. And yet, where have they set up their headquarters? It's in Cambridge, right next to Cambridge University. So they're very careful about influencing the future decision makers by their money. And I think this is something we need to take seriously and actually make sure the universities begin again to diversify and start moving away from this massive dependence that they have on China. It's a big job, but we need to do it together. That's why IPAC has 25 countries from Japan to America all engaged together, and we're going to be having a big conference in Washington in September to talk about Taiwan.
Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to come on this programme. And I just hope that the next occupant of number 10 listens to you and indeed, if it was my choice, give you a very significant job, because you're one of the few people who really talk sense on this topic. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Thank you.
Benedict, how interventionist should a government be? I mean, Ian Duncan-Smith, they're talking about the threat to China when it comes to our universities, taking our intellectual property, and yet there are UK businesses setting up headquarters and setting up factories in China, a huge growth market in their middle class. And yet every time a UK company, European company, an American company wants to sell things in China, China demands that Chinese companies have a 50% stake. Chinese companies who will have on their boards members of the Chinese Communist Party.
It's very difficult because, as you said, we've been kind of sleeping on the One Belt, One Road initiative for a very long time. We've allowed China to expand its networks, and it's now very firmly embedded in our sphere of influence. You need to remember the Belt and Road initiative, it doesn't end in Central Asia. It ends in Lisbon. You know, we are fully part of what China would consider its sphere of influence. So whilst we can talk about, needing some sort of alliance to get together, we all need to find a way of, opposing China's expansion, we are not really in a position where we can cut China out. We've tried doing that with Russia, incidentally, and look how it's biting us quite badly, because Russia, again, had already bedded itself into the way that Western democracies run themselves. So it's going to take a very different, much more measured approach. We aren't simply going to be able to go, right, sanction this, cut that off, because we will end up damaging ourselves. This is something that's going to take decades to slowly wean ourselves off and offer cheaper, more reliable alternative services, manufacturing bases than the Chinese can offer. It's also, I'm afraid, it's going to involve giving a lot of money to third world and developing countries to try to tempt them away from China's sphere of influence. That means doing deals with people in Africa, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, with people who we don't necessarily like.
And very, very briefly, because it's just popped into my head and I want to ask you this. I mean, China has potentially got a huge real estate bubble that could burst.
Yeah.
If China goes ping, how much of a threat is that to the global economy?
Well, that's going to be pretty devastating. I mean, we saw what happened when COVID hit China, and because of its zero COVID policy, it started shutting down pretty much the entirety of the Yangtze Delta, which is about a third of all China's industrial base. So if you were to have a situation where you've got, whole vast real estate companies going out of business, people not able to pay back their loans, all that sort of thing, yeah, that's akin to the global financial crisis in 2008, if not, in fact, slightly larger. Now, the Communist Party has much larger mechanisms to intervene in its own, centrally planned economy than perhaps a lot of Western economies do. Nonetheless, we shouldn't pretend that it's monolithic and that it's impregnable. It is entirely possible at some stage that China could catch a real economic cold.
Yeah, indeed, and it will affect us all. Benedict, thank you so much. What do you guys think? Time for some views. John says about the energy crisis, BP already pay more tax than anyone else. They should invest in more production and not have to pay windfall taxes. Richard says, as someone with a defined contribution pension, I welcome oil company profits as this will make my pension and thus future income grow. Charles says, I don't understand why the forecourts can't reduce the price of fuel. Saying it's because global prices are high is rubbish. It's the same manufacturers that control the price. Paul says, before you chastise British Petroleum and its shareholders, just consider that since 2015, the share price is down 30%. That's a considerable loss. And Dee says, fuel profits are global. We would be entitled to quite a small percentage of this. Germany has higher personal tax bills, charges for ambulances, and has only just started paying its fair dues to NATO, for starters. Thanks for all your emails. Now, are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. It's time for today's Alex Agenda. So, a confidential document prepared by spin doctor Linton Crosby's campaign group apparently advises Boris Johnson to add 39 to 50 new Tory peers to the Lords on condition they sign a written agreement to always vote with the government. Let's think about that. Rather than the second chamber providing essential scrutiny, this is an attempt to use it as an instrument of bribery to flag through whatever the government says. In my view, it's beyond a fiddle. It's jobs for the boys and blackmail. I'm not surprised. I've seen this before. Remember that snap election of 2019? I do. A list was being circulated called Men and Measures, with plans to promise people in the Brexit Party peerages and positions if they stepped down. Plans coming straight out of Johnson's 10 Downing Street. I called it out then. I even reported it to the Met Police. And I will call it out again now. Unless we want to become a tin pot dictatorship, dirty plans to fix politics have no place in our democracy. Now, when I read that British cider makers were saying their reputation is being damaged by cheap, substandard alternatives and are asking for protections like champagne gets, I did a little West Country whoop. For the country that makes the most cider in Europe, how is it that horrific fake news flavoured pop is the only thing you get in most British pubs outside of Gloucestershire? Some of the biggest names contain more water than apple juice and are made from concentrates with sugary flavours and syrups. Now, any proper Zoida drinker knows the real thing isn't full of fizz. It's usually murky and it tastes like a stagnant pool of fetid apples with a dead sheep thrown in. I can't tell you how many times I've asked for cider in a pub, and when offered the Drek on offer, I commence a little rant about my life plan to buy a little green van, fill it with hay bales and kegs of scrumpy to show hipsters what real cider is. Well, apparently that's all I've got time for. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News. Same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. First of all, though, it's the weather forecast. I hope it's looking good and I hope your afternoon and evening are too. I'll see you tomorrow. But for now, bye-bye from me.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McKibben from the Met Office. A breezy but rather humid day with that breeze coming from the southwest and bringing a lot of cloud with it. The heavier rain that we saw earlier is easing away. It's pushing into the North Sea and we're left with Couple of weather fronts crossing the country, bringing large areas of clouds, some showery bursts of rain, but also relatively warm and humid air. So a lot of cloud covering the UK on Tuesday afternoon. Spells of mainly light rain across parts of Wales, northwest England, and perhaps the southwest in places as well. The rain turning more showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Brighter skies here and feeling warm, 24 Celsius there in Peterhead, but particularly hot in the southeast, where it will stay dry with some sunshine, and 30 Celsius is expected. And it stays dry in the far south and southeast into the evening, whilst the cloudy and damp zone continues across parts of western England and Wales. Further showers and longer spells of rain push into Scotland, a wind strengthening in the northwest of Scotland, and a mild night for all mid to high teens across the board. In some places, temperatures no lower than 19 Celsius. So another cloudy start